Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Wednesday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky, Jarred Vanderbilt gets some bad news. Where are the Lakers going to go from here? He's out until at least January. That's next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers your first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, no matter how or where you get your podcasts. This one's always free and never behind paywall. And Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go hang out with over 26,000 disappointed but not surprised fans of the Lakers who are getting the news, same news that the rest of us got on Tuesday, that Jarred Vanderbilt, Andy, this time actually did suffer a setback. We've been told that at different times in this process that slow healing and slower progression is not necessarily a setback. This, the news was on Tuesday, qualifies as a setback. He's got fluid on his knee. It's not even really anything that has to do with his rehabbing feet.
It's clearly a setback. There is fluid now in his left knee. This was a report from Shams and Dave McMenamin of ESPN. Quote, Lakers forward Jarred Vanderbilt has recently experienced fluid in his left knee during his rehabilitation from off-season procedures to both feet and is targeting early January for his return, the Lakers told ESPN on Tuesday. And that in and of itself is significant because this is not even sources. This is coming directly from the team. We don't know anything in terms of whether, say, doing the physical therapy, like it's possible, and again, purely speculative, but I don't think this is talking out of my hind parts. It is possible that, say, one foot is further along than the other, and as you're doing this process of rehab, you're favoring one of the feet over the other. That starts putting pressure on that knee. Then all of a sudden you start having some type of issue involved while doing the rehab. It could just be a freak, fluky thing, whatever. Again, we don't have many details, which is, I guess, consistent with the way this stuff.
I don't think you first of all, you don't exactly know. They might not even know exactly when something happened, when this started.
Oh, but they may have it. They may have more of an idea other than a one.
I think update. I know we've had discussions about, transparency and this and that. I mean, I think this is about, what you expect them to release.
I'm not even saying it necessarily to be critical of the Lakers. I'm saying we don't have any info beyond that. And it has been on a case-by-case basis in terms of appropriateness or not. It has been in the pattern of the Lakers to not provide much in the way of details. That's all I'm saying. Right. We don't have much in the way of details about how this thing that is theoretically unrelated to the feet that are being rehabbed occurred.
Right. And the how, assuming it was just, bum luck and nobody like whacking him with a bat or something like that, is kind of the secondary to how the other part of the news, which is he's out until at least January. And you look at it and I think when you say targeting a return with Lakers, giving that information to Shams and Dave, and I have there's another part of this report that we'll get to over the course of the show, which I find both intriguing and kind of laughable. But this part of it, when the Lakers say, they're targeting January, that is not, language that is dripping with confidence. You say, oh, well, we're hoping you're around early January, the guy might be back. I think at this point, you can hope if you're the Lakers, but getting precise with when you think he's going to be back on the floor is at this point a challenge.
Except
eyeing an early return, early January return.
Except if you start parsing this, and especially in terms of the way info has been typically relayed to us, this is not a reevaluation in early January. It's an actual targeting date. So by the standards of how this stuff has been typically relayed, that's optimistic. That is actually,
Yes.
it is. I mean, you can think that you can not buy into their optimism if you don't want to. And frankly, I don't blame anybody that doesn't, but it doesn't change the fact that by the language we are typically used to and the process we are typically used to, this is them basically puffing out their chest and saying, Jarred Vanderbilt, January 3rd market.
Yeah, I guess that is true. I mean, if you really wanted to hedge, you just say, reevaluating, you just keep this thing.
We hope you forget about it.
It is a problem for the Lakers. I mean, I don't think anybody was expecting Vanderbilt to be back anytime soon. But then, but the thing about it is, Andy, like there's two things. Like, first of all, they said they were hoping he'd be back at the beginning of the season. So they obviously have been off in their timelines a little bit. So you can target early January if you'd like. That doesn't mean I think you're going to hit it.
I said no optimism on my part. I'm just saying by their language, this is cock of the walk.
No, I get that. And so the other part of this, and it gets to the sort of what the Lakers do from here question, is just what is he going to look like when he gets back? Let's say Vando returns January 15th. At that point, he will have missed, I don't want to say he missed most of last season, but he was, I mean, because you could sit here and argue about what most means. He missed a healthy portion of it. Certainly missed a big chunk of the end. Hasn't played in the preseason. Didn't, get, training camp and all that kind of stuff.
He missed he missed like 2/3 of the season. If that's not most to you.
Sure. But my point is, he is not, he will have come back in January, essentially having missed most of a, season and a half. And so there is a limit realistically as to how good you can expect him to play. The kind of thing that if you were, wanted to go to see a Laker game and, you're sponsored by Game Time, you download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. When you got to that game, you would not assume that Jarred Vanderbilt would necessarily be able to contribute right away.
Fair. I mean, we saw last year when he had, two separate prolonged absences. The first time he came back, he did not look right at all. Then he was shelved for, if memory serves, a few weeks, came back, looked terrific, and then got hurt again. And that's when he missed the remainder of the season. So I've said this before. I have been guarded optimism or trying to talk myself into a rosy scenario, but it at least sounded somewhat sensible or believable that some of the time this has taken has been them being exceptionally cautious against the idea of a setback and believing that it was more important to lose the time on the front end so you get everything you want on the back end. That, however, felt much rosier before we learned about the knee.
Yeah, I mean, but this is a common thing with injuries, when you are in rehab, assuming you're trying, your body is completely out of balance. You're just, and so different parts haven't been working. You haven't been doing stuff. You're not as strong in areas that you used to be. You have to rebuild, when your feet have surgery, you got to rebuild all that back up, and other things can go wrong. I mean, we've all been in situations where, your car breaks, whatever it might be, and you kind of you start playing whack-a-mole with all the stuff to try to keep it on the road, and different things break. Andy, the knee bone is connected to the thigh bone. I mean, all these are systems that are interconnected to each other. When we come back, though, let's talk a little bit about where the Lakers go from here, and this, I think, I'll use the word again, laughable portion of the report from Shams and Dave. So all that coming up next. Locked On Lakers, Andy, is brought to you by Game Time. I am a huge fan of seeing live sports with my kids. We like to go particularly to MLS games. We've been to the Galaxy a couple times. We've been to LAFC. We even went this summer to see games in St. Louis and in Montreal. In all of these cases, when it's time to get ready to go to the game, we're using the Game Time app to do it. And what I love about Game Time is the information that I get as a ticket purchaser. I want to know exactly how much my tickets are going to cost. I do not want to have to try to calculate fees at checkout and all that stuff. So all-in pricing like you get on Game Time is a huge feature for me. And I love the idea of being able to see exactly where in the stadium we're going to be sitting and what the view of the field is going to be. So I know if this is a good spot for the kids, like they don't necessarily like being behind the goal, that or like want to see the corners, whatever. They want to be in a certain area. I can tell if this is going to be a good view for them with the seat view thing. And because it's Game Time and they have the lowest price guarantee, I know I'm getting the best price for these tickets as I possibly can. So if you want to go see something, whether it's a show, a game, whatever it might be, download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time.
Locked On Lakers is also brought to you by PrizePicks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active users. PrizePicks, the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, then just watch those winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 picks, correct? Or you can get creative, like if you and your friends decide you want to get down on whether or not Steph Curry will have more or less than 5 3-pointers next week, or Giannis more than 30 points. You cook up hot takes with your friends and win real money this basketball season when you and your crew run your game on PrizePicks. PrizePicks, the best way to get action on sports in most states, including California, Texas, and Georgia, the only real money daily fantasy sports platform with injury insurance. So your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured, and you can collect your winnings in 15 minutes. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA and get $50 instantly when you play just $5. That's code LOCKEDONNBA on PrizePicks, and you get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even have to win to get the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. So easy. PrizePicks. Run your game.
So I guess the more things change, the more they stay the same. In the short term, the Lakers really just learned that what they have is what they have. And, we'll get to potential trades. We'll get to some other stuff. But for the time being, at least, if you want to call December 15th the earliest realistic date that the Lakers could start making trades, you got tonight's game in Miami will not be the debut of new players because Rob Pelinka is springing into action. That's just not how this is going to work. And really, probably until the deadline, if the Lakers make a move, what they have is what they have. And they got to figure out a way to make do. And it is getting harder and harder to do that. And, particularly teams with size are giving the Lakers huge problems, no pun intended, because the Lakers bigs outside of Anthony Davis are very susceptible on the defensive end. We'll put it that way, whether you're talking about LeBron or Rui.
And by the way, that's the list. I mean, we're out of due. I mean, other than Christian Coloco, who we've talked about, I think all things considered and realistic, Coloco's done a pretty good job, but
he gets graded on a curve. I realize it's professional sports. Everybody's got a job to do, but I am grading Coloco on a curve.
Well, I think in terms of realistic expectations, he's done fine. He's done fine, but you also don't want to be playing him. Like, you don't, as much as I love Armel Traore's hustle and his athleticism, and he will go after every single loose ball, like he plays 100 miles an hour in a way that this team, frankly, could use a bit more of, a lot more of. You don't want to be playing Traore right now, even if you even if you love his hustle. Like, the Lakers are in a position right now, and we've seen over the last few years, they tend to be more effective when they can go bigger. It's just not really an option for them right now, and there's a cap on how big they can actually play.
Well, it's how big they can play, but also too, those moments have come with a little bit of extra stuff, whether that's Vanderbilt or other players. Go back to the title season when you have Morris, that you can play big with everybody, but you're also dealing with a different LeBron. Rui has not
different AD in some respects too.
Yeah, I would agree. LeBron is not, or Rui has not made progress in that way. You have a different front court or different back court that didn't put quite as much pressure on the front court. Whether you're talking about D'Lo and Reeves playing together, D'Lo and Reeves playing separately, whatever it might be, even with Vincent on the floor, who improves the defense a little bit, you're still talking about a defensive back, a backcourt that is not strong defensively.
And the two best wing defenders that they have on this team, Reddish and Christie, they're big guards. But the minute you start asking them to check even some threes, but definitely 3.5 players, then they're actually pretty small. And those are your biggest wings.
So the point here is JJ Redick, like Darvin, has some structural problems that he's got to work with. I think this team is personnel-wise worse defensively than last year, because the meaningful change that you've made in the rotation is swapping out Taurean Prince for Dalton Knecht. And you can be excited about at Knecht's potential. You can think Knecht is a better offensive player and all that, whatever. He certainly can do things that Taurean shouldn't be trying. At the very least, he would do them periodically, and it never, it didn't work out that well. You cannot, on any reasonable way, claim that Knecht is a better defender than Taurean. He's got shortcomings, Prince does, but he's a better defender than Dalton Knecht. I think we can all agree about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's not controversial.
No, the best case scenario you could make is that Dalton's offense, when it's really clicking, the shooting, can stabilize what they're doing on that side of the ball in ways that can help them out defensively. But that's not about Dalton's defense. That's about his offense helping an overall effect for a defense. Yes. But once you actually start defending, like the act of defending, Taurean is clearly better than Dalton.
So, this is the problem with the Lakers. And when we were talking about, we had a couple conversations, Andy, about is the record legitimate and all that stuff. They're 10-4. And the numbers that really stuck out was just how bad they were defensively relative to the rest of the league. That has not gotten better. They played a pretty good game against San Antonio. They've had moments.
I thought they played pretty well offensively against OKC.
Yeah. But it's also been accompanied with some pretty significant collapses and stuff. And the Minnesota game, the offense was horrible. But it's also, they're at that place right now where they get down by 8 or 10. I don't expect them to be able to really make comebacks especially against good teams, because I don't think they can get enough stops. I think there are sections of games where the Lakers are able to string together good movement, good, some clean shots. The shots go in instead of rimming out, whatever it might be. But it is hard for me to picture them getting 4 or 5 stops in a row. I can picture 4 or 5 baskets in a row, but not 4 or 5 stops.
Oh, coming up next, I want to put one final note on the defense, just because it's been on my mind anyway. And we opened the entry to this conversation just by talking about no Vando, defensive effect, this team just hemorrhaging points. And then we can get to the part that I know you want to bring out from Dave and Shams' report that you found laughable. And I know this because you and I were swapping emails about it, and I also found it laughable. So we will get into that coming up next. Locked On Lakers is brought to you by Chime. Take control of your finances by using a Chime checking account with features like no maintenance fees, fee-free overdraft up to $200, and getting paid up to 2 days early with direct deposit. So here's how it works. Set up direct deposit in your Chime account. After a qualifying direct deposit of $200 plus, Chime will notify you to enroll in SpotMe. And with an activated debit card, Chime will spot you up to $200 when you exceed your balance, and your next direct deposit is applied to your negative balance. Chime never charges fees or interest for using SpotMe. Make your fall finances a little greener by working towards your financial goals with Chime. Open your account in 2 minutes at chime.com/NBA. That's chime.com/NBA. Chime feels like progress. Banking services and debit card provided by the Bank Corp NA or Stride Bank NA. Members FDIC. SpotMe eligibility requirements and overdraft limits apply. Boosts are available to eligible Chime members enrolled in SpotMe and are subject to monthly limits. Terms and conditions apply. Go to chime.com/disclosure for details.
All right, Andy. LockedOnDaily.com is where you can go sign up for the Locked On Lakers newsletter, have the show delivered right to your inbox every day. So go do that. LockedOnDaily.com, click on Locked On Lakers, and you get our newsletter. Great way to keep up the show and what's going on around the league.
Yeah, absolutely. Real quick before we get to that one section of the report, because we're talking about defense and their struggles. I've mentioned this before on various shows, but I want to mention it again because I thought against Minnesota, it reared its head in very ugly ways. This defense switches way too damn much. Like as an automatic scheme, they switch way too often, way too easily, and making it even worse, they never eventually switch back to more proper assignments. So you will have so many
which is, the somewhat related to what the opponents are doing. If you don't bring guys back to their original defenders and stuff, it's hard sometimes to jump back. But yeah, I mean, there
are way too many times where you have D'Lo or Gabe or Austin, Max, Dalton on guarding like a Jokic type or a Gobert type for 5 to 10 seconds. Like it's not tenable. It also feels to me very indicative of a defense that does not always seem to have enough fight where it feels like handing off assignments without any effort. Like I actually tweeted out after the Minnesota game at Cam Brothers, they switch so easily and automatically. It often feels like they are like basically working with the opposing offense. And it's like a coordinated dance that they're doing. And everybody knows where their partners are supposed to be. And you're handing this off. So it's almost like a beautiful sequence that's seamless with this switch, as opposed to anything that feels like actual defense or resistance. And I'm not saying they should never switch ever. Like we commented a few times last year that it felt like sometimes Darvin wasn't switching enough, but this is too much. And more importantly, it is not even sort of working.
Well, I think it is a function of, I'll put it this way. Teams don't switch this much because they want to. They do it because they
I would love
I'm not saying you can't do it less. I'm just saying that I see what they are doing as a sign, as a strategy that comes out of weakness, not one that comes from strength. Like they are doing this because they feel like it is the best way to get something that approximates, defensive principles and things that they can do. And some kind of system that they can follow. I'm not saying it's the one that can't imagine it's what Redick would do if he could assemble a defense and play the way he wants to. But I think it is a function of having players that he does not believe can play in other ways. And there is some evidence to show that he's right. It's not like they're just making this up. I don't disagree that they could vary it up and just make, if you're going to be bad anyway, be bad in multiple ways. But,
sure.
I don't see this as a strategy they're clinging to because like it's some sort of like misguided philosophical thing that JJ Redick is trying to do.
I haven't had an opportunity to be at a practice or be in front of JJ Redick in a while. The next time I do, I plan to ask him about this because I'm not sure you're correct about that. I'm not sure I'm correct, but based on what we see and the frequency and the ease and that it's gone on this long, I'm not convinced you're correct. But again,
look, there are teams that switch a lot because they can. But it is interesting to think about, like, okay, what could they be doing instead? And you start thinking about, well, Rui is horrible at chasing people over screens. D'Lo is not very good at chasing people over screens. LeBron is not very good at this point at moving around and moving over those things and being run around the floor and stuff like that. And like, so, you have a backcourt that does not do a great job, putting up some kind of resistance at the perimeter. There's just, when you start to think, to me at least, when you start to think about there now, you have individual certain guys. Max Christie's done a pretty good job, and there are other guys you can.
All of these guys, though, I've seen work harder through screens and seen them work harder to navigate it than this season, which is what makes me feel like this is more. And the more you're asked,
or told you don't have to do it, and you just switch off on every
right.
Rui
may not be good at it, but I've seen him work harder at it.
D'Lo may not be good at it. I don't like what they're doing. I think it is. We'll find out. It would be interesting to get a better feel for what it is, and certainly look. I mean, when Redick talked. One of the more damning comments, I don't think we really got into it, but one of the more damning comments that came out of the Minnesota game was when Redick referenced the Denver game where he said, this is an aberration, the way we did not play, didn't play hard, and didn't compete. That was an aberration, referencing that second half against Denver. And he said, well, maybe it wasn't, that I thought was a very pointed and damning comment. Maybe it is part of the character of this team to just kind of stop playing. And for a guy who, when you start thinking about messages that coaches are sending, that's a pretty strong one. So, and there may be something to that where, the defensive philosophy is one that doesn't encourage them to have to do things that require a little bit more fight. So, there is a link there potentially. So we'll see where it goes. I do want to mention this before we're done, though. The very last paragraph in this report from Dave and Shams. We don't really have enough time to unpack this completely, but it reads as following: beyond bolstering the defense by being called on to guard opponents' top tier perimeter players, like Jarred Vanderbilt could be the kind of person who reshapes the way that the Lakers play defense and offers them the opportunity to switch less and all that stuff, puts other guys in different spots. I mean, that's certainly possible. Anyway, continuing, Vanderbilt's absence has prevented new coach JJ Redick from figuring out his ideal rotation. Okay. His absence has also prevented the Lakers front office from fully evaluating the needs of its roster as trade season approaches. You lost me there.
That's the laughable part.
That's the laughable part. Fully is doing a tremendous amount of heavy lifting in that sense. Because, yes, technically, it is true. You cannot fully understand what your needs are. And look, I was an advocate of, if you haven't made a trade that you see by training camp, play 20 games, play 25 games and see what you got. And Vanderbilt being hurt for that certainly impacts their ability to evaluate. So sure, can you fully evaluate something? No, because an important piece is missing. But that part is leaked either by or on behalf of Rob Pelinka to try to take pressure away from what might not be coming, which is help. And so you say, well, look, I mean, it's hard. The Lakers are in a tough spot. I mean, they haven't even really been able to see, what it looks like to get an idea of what they should be trading for anyway. No, I think we all have a pretty good idea of things that could help the Lakers. And as I mentioned in the previous segment, even if you thought Vanderbilt was coming back, you still have to be preparing for Vanderbilt to not be the guy who can just step in and guard the opponent's best player. And all. You had an example last year of Vando coming back from injury and being terrible. So you have to plan for that possibility and think about that in who you're bringing in as part of a trade. But as you like to point out, Andy, whether Jarred Vanderbilt is around or not, it's still pretty obvious you could use another defensive-oriented wing. Like that doesn't, it's like this isn't rocket science. It's to some degree. Like you have a pretty good idea of what they need.
It's also laughable because you've had an incredibly long sample size with this roster because it's been basically the same roster for the equivalent of about 2 full seasons.
Right.
You have a pretty good idea of what this looks like, what the weaknesses are, what the strengths are. If you wanted to get, I guess, cynical might be the wrong word, but if you're trying to look for coded language.
But it might be the right word.
Well, maybe the best or most honest, if dishonestly presented interpretation of this is they'd like to trade Vanderbilt if possible, but they can't trade him until he's back on the court. And therefore not being able to use him as a piece gets in the way of some of their potential options. And therefore they can't figure out exactly who to target and how. Okay. That's actually believable. It's just not what was said there. But to me,
that's very different than the needs of the roster.
Right. Unless you somehow believe, and it's preposterous if Rob does, that somehow Jarred Vanderbilt's return, even at his tippy top level, and that's a level, by the way, that I think is a really good player, somehow solves all the defense by himself. Get the F out of here. You need more wing defenders. If you think that, another big is the high priority, then Jarred Vanderbilt's absence doesn't have a thing to do with that.
If you can't figure it, it is I would refer to it as a fairly profound and catastrophic failure of imagination. If you can't, again, fully is doing a lot of lifting here. And so if we all know we're in apron land now, the Lakers have trade chips that are flawed. They are limited in what they could do. It is hard to, Gabe Vincent feels expendable. Vanderbilt isn't expendable, except he may not play, which sort of makes him expendable. You have guys around the roster, but Rui, as up and down as he's been, if you trade Hachimura, you got to replace him with something. If you trade D'Angelo Russell, you've got to make up that skill set somewhere. And so, that puts there are 100 reasons the Lakers are in a bind, but don't start trying to add to the list because you're like, wow, and we can't even get a feel for what we are without being like, okay, yeah, a little bit, but
that's that again.
Yeah.
I can.
You're not waiting. If you think you need Dorian Finney-Smith, for example, just to put a name out there, and you think Dorian Finney-Smith would help, Dorian Finney-Smith helps whether Jarred Vanderbilt is playing or
exactly.
not.
They're nowhere close to the same player. They're not duplicative. Like, again, I can come up with a few cynical and, again, sort of dishonestly honest versions of that statement. At face value, it's ridiculous.
It felt a little self-serving. Whoever was moving that nugget over to Dave and to Shams. All right. Well, anyway, Lakers are in Miami tonight, and we'll see how that goes. The Heat are okay. They're not great. But right now, neither are the Lakers. But it is a winnable road game. The Lakers need some of those because, you lose, what is it? 5 of 7, I think it is. And you drop pretty quickly in the Western Conference standings. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go to hang out with over 26,000 subscribers. We, of course, will be back after the game. Keep an eye out for the postcast with Dave Pele as well. And we'll see everyone after the game.